By August 13th of this year, the fires, many man-made, still burning in the Amazon rainforest, had covered the skies of over 1 million square miles with a layer of smoke, blocking out the sun and moon alike. The fires have done more to make people realize how tenuous our relationship with this planet truly is than any climate accord or Earth Day celebration could. The fires, partly due to the normal dry season in the Amazon basin, were exacerbated by agricultural developers illegally burning forest land so it can be used for livestock. Developers that some say have been emboldened by the rhetoric of Brazilian President Bolsonaro, that the fires were just a normal Brazilian tradition. He said, "I used to be called Captain Chainsaw. Now I am Nero, setting the Amazon aflame. But it is the season of the burn." However, as the fires blazed on and the world community took notice, Bolsonaro changed his tune, making this statement on Friday, August 23rd, after finally committing to use the Brazilian military to fight the fires.
It's necessary to be calm when dealing with that matter, the fires in the Amazon. To spread data and unfounded messages inside or outside Brazil doesn't help to solve the problem, and it is being used politically and as misinformation.
Now, as world leaders and movie stars jockey for position as the savior of Amazonia, there is once again a very large group of people being forgotten for the sake of politicized headlines, the people who call the rainforest home. The people of the 305 tribes in Brazil's rainforest. Over 900,000 human beings whose home, culture, and way of life is threatened by greed and politics. And while mainstream media only seeming to take interest in Amazonia when it was a chance to lob insults at Trump or Bolsonaro, all while those who have been in this fight for longer than this year's dry season are pointing out the obvious, that the story of these fires began centuries ago, as Nicole Froyo of Zora magazine wrote. As we move forward on the subject of climate change, especially in the Amazon, we must remember this is a fight that Amazonic indigenous people have been fighting since 1500, when the Portuguese landed in Brazil. So let's take a step into the future as we refuse to repeat the sins of our colonizing past and start watching the hawks.
If you want to know what's going on in your city, in your streets, never back down like Tyrell, and the truth is what you seek. To analyze, investigate from the bottom to the top. You speak your mind like Sean Stone, whether they like it or not. I got Tabitha, Miss Wallace, with the wisdom and the pearl. Between the outrage and the evidence, what's going on in this world. Watching the hawks, watching the hawks, watching the hawks. Listen when they talk.
Welcome, everybody, to Watching the Hawks. I'm Tabitha Wallace, and joining me now to better understand the struggle for indigenous land live from Uruguay is the International Coordinator for the World Rainforest Movement, Winnie Overbeek. Thank you so much for joining me, Winnie.
Thank you so much for inviting.
So, Winnie, how have these fires affected the indigenous populations in the Amazonia, and how many people are at risk of losing what is essentially their ancestral home?
Well, the fires, they affect a lot the indigenous people in the Amazon because their territories occupy about 23% of the Amazon. So it's a huge, very significant part of the Amazon. And many of their territories are located there where the deforestation frontier is placed. So there where especially the agriculture is advancing. And the fire is like a very tragic symptom of this process that is going on, especially since the 1970s, that first the roads in the military period have been built, and after the roads there came the loggers, and the loggers took out the valuable timber, and then after that the forest was burned, and that's what we see happening now, and it's happening every year in the dry season. And especially for the indigenous people, it is a tragedy because by burning the forest in their territories, they lose what is most precious for them. Their mode of living depends on the forest. Also, the water sources are being destroyed. And what is very serious, especially in the Amazon, 90% of the conflicts in the rural areas in Brazil, including in the Amazon, they are happening exactly in the Amazon because the indigenous people, they try to defend their territories, they try to defend their forest, which is their home. And in these conflicts, there are many assassinations, there are many violent conflicts that are making the situation even more serious for the people and long-standing. And that is so, the situation this year is especially very serious because the extension of the advance of the agricultural frontier is going much faster than before.
These fires come as the indigenous people there are fighting a proposed amendment that goes along with what you were saying, this amendment to the Brazilian Constitution that would essentially allow indigenous lands to be open to private corporations for everything from mining to timber to livestock development without permission from the tribes or representatives, without any sort of congressional action by the Brazilians. Does that amendment violate any treaties or previous agreements? And how are the indigenous fighting things like this, these sorts of legal issues to their protection of their homelands?
Well, yes, it's good that you mentioned the Brazilian Constitution, which is actually one of the best in the world. In its Article 231, it says that the rights of indigenous peoples to occupy their traditional lands must be ensured by the federal government. The federal government has the duty to demarcate these areas because the Constitution says these areas are essential for the physical and cultural survival of indigenous peoples. They cannot be sold, they cannot be bought, they cannot be transferred to third parties. So what President Bolsonaro is doing since he was in his election campaign and since he is now in presidency, of saying, well, let's enter into the indigenous territories and do agribusiness, do mining, openly support it. He himself is not doing what he said he should be doing as a president of the country, which is in the first place to respect the Constitution. Brazil is also a country that signed and ratified Convention 169 of the International Labour Organization on Indigenous and Tribal Peoples, which also secures the traditional land rights of the indigenous people, but also that the people must be consulted and they have the right to say no to interventions inside their territories. And this is also being violated now, and at this very moment in a very tragical way, by the forest fires. And what we have heard from the area, from many indigenous peoples that have been denouncing that their areas are burning, their forest is burning, that nothing is being done by the authorities. And actually, besides the promotion of the invasion of indigenous territories, President Bolsonaro also has significantly reduced the capacity of the state to control the forest fires. So we have heard reports of indigenous peoples that were reporting to the authorities, but nothing happened until now finally the military has been sent to the area, but it has become much too late and much of the damage has been done already.
My last question for you, we could talk about this all day, but one of my last questions I want to make sure to ask you is the issue of colonization and the fear, not just from Bolsonaro, but from other leaders in South America. You always have the concern that natural disasters or things like this can be used as cover for colonizing-like efforts. How do we, as outsiders from Brazil, help those indigenous people without overstepping our bounds in a way that could be considered going down the road of colonizers in the past?
Well, indeed, the government, and it is a sort of tradition in Brazil to defend the sovereignty of the national territory. It was very strong already during the military dictatorship that they did not accept any foreign intervention. That's in part explains this very strong reaction to the world that is shocked by everything what is happening in the Amazon. And but I think the international solidarity at this moment is very important, and especially the indigenous peoples. They have doing two big mobilizations already in the capital, one in April and one has happened recently, and it were actually the indigenous women. And you can say the connection between the indigenous women with the forest is maybe the strongest in terms of the, the strong beliefs, the strong customs that indigenous people have with the forest. They are one with the forest. They do not separate nature from the people who live inside. And in these mobilizations in the capital, they have demanded international solidarity. I think it's now very important that the world express this solidarity, putting pressure on the Brazilian authorities, on the embassies outside of the country, that the government should fulfill its obligation and respect the Constitution. The Constitution of 1988 has been a very important made a difference in history, because until then, indigenous people, they were not important. Indigenous people were often killed. Indigenous people had no rights, but they are the original inhabitants of the country. We say we speak Portuguese in Brazil, but there are 180 languages spoken in Brazil by the indigenous peoples, and their rights should be respected. The world should also be conscious that much of the deforestation that is happening and the forest fires that are happening is a result of the consumption of products like meat, the consumption of timber in the developed world, in the industrialized world, the consumption of soy, and that is really promoting the deforestation. So when foreign governments are very shocked, they also should take their responsibility. But I think what is most important, and I think the good thing in this whole tragedy, is that it makes a strong appeal for us as a World Rainforest movement, I think for many social movements in the world that are struggling for their rights, that are struggling to keep control over their territory, over the forest, to join hands and to say to our governments, you should respect the people in the first place, you should protect the forest. It's very important for humanity, and I think we have a lot to learn from the indigenous peoples when we want to face all the ecological disasters, especially the climate crisis that we are suffering now, because there have come a lot of money to the Amazon already in the sense of trying to solve the climate problem, compensating for pollution in the north, and that's also not the way forward. But if we want to face the climate crisis, we should leave the oil in the soil, we should reduce severely the consumption of fossil fuels. At the same time, deforestation is causing also climate change, but it's much less cause, and we should conserve forests in the first place for the people who depend on the forest.
Thank you so much. It's so important, as you said, that we think about the people that are there first. And thank you so much for coming on and talking to us here about this today. And hopefully we'll stay in contact as this story develops. The International Coordinator for the World Rainforest Movement, Winnie Overbeek, thank you so much for joining me today from Uruguay.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.